Hi, everybody. It's Christina. How are you? I hope you guys are doing well. Welcome to the 12 Days of Christmas, the third annual 12 Days of Christmas. I'm going to get this pinned, and if you are here joining me live, could you let me know if you can see and hear me okay? And while you are doing that, I'm going to make sure that we are showing up in the right place. All right, looks like we got some people coming in. Hello, hello. Don't be shy. Introduce yourself. Say hello. Hi, Kirsty. Good to see you. Hi, Jessica. Good to see you. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. How are you guys doing today? How's your Monday going so far? Yes, can see and hear you just fine. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kirsty. Hi, Yoli. Good to see you. Thank you so much, Jessica. Are you guys excited for the 12 Days of Christmas event? I can't believe that we've been doing this for 3 years now. This is the third annual one. We've been doing this for 3 years. That's incredible to me. I remember when I was just thinking about doing this. I remember when I was just in the very beginning stages of putting something like this together. I had done several like 5 day challenges and things like that. And I had, done some podcasts with people, but I had never put together a huge event like this. And it's just crazy to me that here we are 3 years later and we're still doing it and we're still having that much fun. Hey, Victoria. She says, Happy Yule. Happy Yule, Victoria. Hi, Marla. Good to see you. Coming in from Pennsylvania. Great. All around the place. We have people from all over the place in our group. We have people from all different countries. Hey, Nicole. Good to see you. Nicole's excited. Okay. All right. It looks like people are starting to come in. So let me get my spiel done with, and then we can get into the really cool stuff. Okay. So, hi everybody, welcome. My name is Christina. I'm the sponsor of this event. Me and my clients and the people in my marketing classes put this on every year. We do the 12 Days of Christmas and we also do the Summer of Magic. So we do two major collabs every single year. And just welcome to this event. We're so excited to have you here. We're so excited for you to be participating with us, whether it's your third, your second, or your first. We put events like this on because we just want to take a moment and just really give back and really vibe ourselves, get into the alignment with the spirit of Christmas, the spirit of giving, right? And it's always just really nice to do this with my biz besties and be able to showcase people that I know and that I love and that I love what they're doing, and I just want the world to know about them. And so that's why I host this event, because I want you guys to know about them as well. And it's just fun to kind of hang out with my biz besties. We have a lot of fun putting this on. There's all types of shenanigans that go on in the private collaborators group and things like that. And it's just a good time. And I will be kicking us off today. So we start today. Today is the 9th, and we will run all the way through to the 20th. So that gives us 2 full weeks. So we'll go Monday through Friday. We'll take a break on the weekend, and then we'll pick back up. And we do that to give everybody kind of a break, and because I kind of think everybody should have the weekend off if you can. So I try not to make people, work on the weekends. I know I wouldn't want to, so I try not to make other people do that. But yeah, so we'll go 2 weeks. I'll start us off on Fridays. I believe on a couple of the Fridays, both Fridays, and I think maybe one of the other days, we're going to have two people presenting. So most of the days will be just one workshop, just to kind of keep it simple. And then some Fridays you might have a couple workshops. But we did that so you can kind of, you can come back on the weekend and catch up and watch them as you want. All of the videos will be available until the 31st of December. So that gives you almost a whole month to watch all of the replays, to grab all your gifts, and to enter into all of the raffles and giveaways that will be going on, that will be individually sponsored by the individual workshop presenters, right? So the only way that you can attend this, so if you're watching this live in the group, you're in the right place. If you are watching this as a replay somewhere else, like on my Facebook business page or on YouTube, chances are you might not be in the group. So if you want to participate in the live event, all you have to do is come on over to Facebook, type in the Profitable Psychic, and it will come up with my group, and you can join there. There's 3 security questions, and Basically, it's just ask, like what is your business? If you have a spiritual business, tell us about that, right? And then if you don't have a business and you have no interest in starting a business, you can still participate. All you have to do is in the 3 comment area, just type in one of them, 12 days of Christmas. And so that way I know that you're just here for the event, and you don't have to go through the whole intake form like what normally people have to go through, right? So we put on this event once per year. It's annual, and the people that participate in this event are people that are my personal one-on-one clients, or they're students that are in my marketing courses. So I have one of my marketing courses that you probably know me as probably best by is the Make Tarot Your Business mentorship program. I have retired that program this year, and I am now running the Market Yourself as a Tarot Life Coach program this year, and into next year. And that program is all about how to basically step out of doing readings and start getting more into the spiritual coaching aspect of it. Like if you want to set up a school or online academy, or you want to just start, connecting with people who are a better fit for you. And what I mean by that is like people who actually want to do the work, people who are interested in following through on their goals and don't just want the predictions and don't just want the psychic insight, right? Like they want to have an interactive part of the process of the client coach relationship. And so that's what I'm running right now, and that's open. And also I will be gifting away 2 workshops or trainings. So if you go to my academy, www.theprofitablepsychic.com, you will see on my academy website, like I have a bunch of free workshops and I have a bunch of paid workshops or premium workshops. And so anything that is $100 or under, I will be gifting 2 of those away for this event. I will be gifting one I will give you guys a secret question to answer during this live stream. And then I will be doing another presentation on the last day on the 20th. And that's going to be about intuitive storytelling. And I'll have another question, a different raffle you can enter there. So basically what's going to happen is you have 2 chances to win. And so what I will do is I'll run a raffle. I'll put everybody's name that participated and answered the secret question into a list. I'll do a little wheel spinny thingy, and I will gift someone a workshop from my academy. And then the next day I'll do it all on the same day, but we'll also have another raffle that you can be entered to win for that one. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, and I hope that wasn't too confusing. So let me know if you have any questions about that. But a lot of the presenters are actually going to be doing giveaways and raffles of their own. So you want to make sure that whenever you read any of the descriptions of the live videos, they should have some sort of instructions in there. They might not have the instructions when they're doing the live stream, but they'll go back and they'll edit that and say, if you want to be entered into the raffle, you need to answer the secret question. Okay. And that will all be done as a comment under the thread area of the live stream, just to make it easy so we're not getting, tons and tons of inboxes and things like that. All right. So any questions about that so far? Thank you so much, Victoria. That's so sweet. She says, you look wonderful today. Thank you. Thank you, Angela. Good to see you. Hi, Natasha. Good to see you. Sheila, welcome, welcome. So again, if you have any questions, just let me know. But I will be giving away about up to $200 worth of classes and workshops this year. And who knows, maybe I might even do a little bit more. I tend to kind of just keep adding to it. So who knows what it will be by the time this event is over, right? And it's exciting, right? Like not only do we have 12 days, 10 days, but 12 presentations. Not only do we have 12 workshops this year, and it was really interesting how that kind of worked out. We have 12 days of Christmas and 12 workshops. It doesn't always work out that way, but it just happened to align that way this year. And so everybody who will be presenting will be giving away a gift as well. This could be an ebook. This could be like a meditation. This could be a workbook. This could be journals. This could be really anything. There's a lot of different gifts everybody's going to be giving out. And that's in addition to any type of giveaways or raffles or anything like that each individual person wants to do. So any questions about that? All right, everybody's good. Now, today for my workshop, I will be talking about the traditional and modern symbolism with Yule as it relates to contemporary Christian iconography. I can never say that word right. It's like cartography and cartography, right? So I might slip up, and I'm sorry if I do that, but that's just what it is, right? But this is not the end all be all of like pagan tradition as it relates to the Christian mythos, right? Or Christian icons. There's a lot of different traditions out there that may not actually relate in any which way that I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to be coming from the perspective of really more of like the Northern European kind of traditions that celebrate Yule, as it's called, right? So I'll be coming from more of the Northern European indigenous traditions, specifically the Germanic and the Scandinavian, really, and the Celtic peoples. Basically, those two things. But that's not to say, that this will be like a broad overview of all of pagan symbols as it relates to Christianity or Christmas. What it really is it just means that, that I only have an hour. That's what it really boils down to, is I only have an hour. So I had to do this in a way that I wanted to talk about a bunch of different things, but I can only do that through the lens of a couple different cultures and societies. There is a plethora, a wealth of information out there about different ways that colonizers have basically appropriated pagan symbols and traditions and different ways that kingdoms have kind of overtaken each other and merged with one another and things like that, and how it's a tangled web. If nothing else, it's a tangled web of different ways that Christian settlers and colonizers really took the pagan indigenous peoples' beliefs and spiritual practices and kind of intermingled it with Christianity. And that's going to be some about what we're going to talk about today, but by no means is this like the end all be all of that. There's a lot of different information out there, and I'm obviously not going to be talking about African indigenous traditions or talking about South American traditions and things like that. I don't really have a background in that, and maybe one day I will, and maybe one day I'll be able to present that information. But like most of you, I am still really learning, right? This is still kind of like something that is just part of my spiritual awakening, part of my spiritual journey, right? So I'm curious, if you are listening live, or if you're watching the replay, put in the comments down below. I'm curious, how many of you actually find Christmas and the whole holiday season to be kind of difficult? Whether that is because of your family just happens to be Christian and you are not, or any other situation like that. So tell me about that in the comments below. Like, what is your biggest struggle with that? What are the thoughts that you think about that? Or what are the feelings that you think about that? Like, what are some of the things that you feel? Like, for example, for a really long time, not growing up in a Christian household, I felt, especially with my friends growing up and especially in school, and I went to a very small school. So like the people that I went to kindergarten with, I typically graduated high school with. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them I did. I think we had like maybe 50 to 100 people in my graduating class. Like, I didn't go to a very, very big school. I know we definitely had less than probably 500 people total in the school. So what are some of your feelings about that? I know I definitely felt outcasted, and this was even before I even really understood what paganism is. And this is really before before I even bought my first book on witchcraft, which was Teen Witch by Silver Ravenwolf. That was like back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s or so. So that I was already feeling those feelings, even as a young person, even as a child. I was already feeling those feelings of, we don't do that. We don't go to church, or we don't do those things, And I definitely from an early age kind of felt like I was almost embarrassed because I didn't do those things, or I didn't see my family doing those things, right? And I guess I'll start out with my spiritual beliefs, because actually I don't think I've ever even talked about that. Jessica says, yes, family is difficult because my in-laws are toxic and also Christian, and insist that we pray with them, and even ask that my kids hold their hands and pray. And yeah, I'm going to talk about that too, because that still is like one of my things that is really, really difficult for me to deal with. Like, I've worked past a lot of different things, but it's still that whole like sitting down to pray and praying to Jesus and things like that. Because, it's never just God. It's always to Jesus when the Christian faith, because that's basically what the Christian faith is the belief in Jesus as a savior, right? And so it can be really difficult, especially if you have a strong matriarch or patriarch of your family, like I do on both sides, and they insist on doing it their way. Hey, Marissa, good to see you. Good to see you. So, I don't think I've ever talked about my own spiritual beliefs. And I think that's really weird for me to actually sit down and admit because I've been teaching and creating content around spirituality since like hardcore, like as a full time job since about 2014. That's when I really started getting into content creation. I was working on the psychic hotlines for a couple years before then and just working off the psychic hotlines. But when I started actually wanting to run my own business and start building up my own clientele, I found content creation is probably the easiest and most productive way to get clients. And we have to take a pause because I need to show you guys my adorable polar bear mug. Found that at Walmart, by the way. It comes with a spoon, which is even cuter. So I've been creating content since 2014, and in a lot of ways, I think leaders are reluctant to talk about their own spiritual beliefs. And to be quite honest with you, my spiritual beliefs are like totally like from day to day, they're honestly very different. Like I don't really have a consistent set of spiritual or religious kind of beliefs. Hey, good to see you. And it can be difficult as someone like that who really just doesn't really have a solid foundation or didn't really grow up in one or didn't really find a lot of value in connecting with pagans locally to them, which I made a lot of great friends, and I did that a little bit in my adult life, and I did it through meetups and things like that. But I kind of found, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of pagan meetups and a lot of pagan communities can be almost as dogmatic as the Christian communities can be. At least that was kind of like my experience with it. People get really set into their routines and they get really set into like their traditions and things like that. And it can be really hard, especially as someone who doesn't really belong to any type of faith, really, that to feel that sense of belonging. So even I felt ostracized definitely by my Christian family, but then I also really felt not really a part of things with my local pagan friends and chosen family as well. So I really, for a really long time, I really don't belong anywhere. And that's kind of how I felt. Victoria says, my family is Christmas crazy with food and gifts and parties and more gifts and events, and it's overwhelming. And I embraced Yule as it wasn't about money or perfection. And that's something really important too. Yeah, that's a really good point that you're making right there, Victoria. Hey, Mario, good to see you. And that is very true. Christmas has become a commercialized thing, and that's just the truth of it. Angela says, I was raised Catholic and went to Catholic school my whole life. As an adult, I came to see how toxic that faith could be. As time has gone on, I have drifted farther and farther away. I now find myself missing the traditions of old faith, but feeling much stronger as a person and a woman. And that's something, yes, that's something as well, too. Like you sacrifice that communal belonging for a sense of sanity, within yourself. And I can definitely relate to that a lot, too. But, if I was to keep it fairly simple and short and to the point, I, as a person, generally believe in everything and I believe in nothing at the same time. I know there's people probably here rolling their eyes like, come on, Christina, you have to believe in something, right? I wouldn't really consider myself religious. I would consider myself probably an agnostic. There was a great period of time in my life where I identified as atheist. I didn't really think there was anything out there, period. But as soon as I got into the spirituality field and I started learning about manifestation and energy and magic and things like that, I kind of learned that, okay, there is something to this, even though I don't think that anyone really knows what that thing is, I believe that there's something, but I don't believe for any stretch of the imagination that humans know what that something is. I don't think it can be contained by a religion or a doctrine. If I had to put a label on my beliefs, I would probably consider myself a universal Unitarian. And I also studied Wiccan clergy with the Aquarian Tabernacle Church. And I did that for like 2 years. And then I also studied with the Corellian tradition and Corellian nativist tradition for like another 5 or 7 years. And I did a couple degree systems with them. And most of my time spent in clergy with the Wiccans was around comparative religion. So even then, still, I really didn't like master anything faith-based. I really was looking at things from more of like an anthropological, sociological kind of, frame of reference or lens that I don't even when I was still working predominantly in the Wiccan clergy field and even doing my volunteer time and things like that, I still never really felt like I was Wiccan or anything like that. It was a good place for me to sit for a long period of time because I really learned about, energy and magic and things like that. And it was good because it gave me like a frame of reference, but it really still didn't answer a lot of questions. And in a lot of ways, when I spent time with the Wiccans, it was almost kind of like, the way I view Wicca is definitely neo-pagan. It's a reconstruction of pagan beliefs, predominantly Celtic pagan beliefs. But also, I kind of feel like at the same time, it's still Christianity because in a lot of ways the doctrines and things like that the Wiccans believe and teach and things like that, it is very much based on the Christian gnosis. It's the same type of symbolism. We have the cups and the chalices and the Holy Grail and the Mother and things like that. So there's a lot of Christians who move away from the church go to Wicca because it is a very, very similar to Christianity. And there's also the other veins of like Gnosticism, or even if you want to even go further back from that, the Old Testament, you can look into Kabbalism and things like that. So, there's a lot of crossover. And I studied that for a long time, and I actually became a really staunch Kabbalist, and that's where I really learned about numerology and, astrology and things like that, and the angels and stuff. And I was really into the angels for a long period of time, still never really considering myself a Christian or Abrahamic in any way, shape, or form, but I really liked the energy of the angels, right? I really like the idea of them being like these archetypes that we can kind of work with, whether if we believe in them as real beings with their own ideas, thoughts, and things like that, that's one thing. But I still tended to really look at things as more of like an archetype, or, looking at like certain angels and how they relate to certain gods and goddesses of earlier versions and things like that. So I always, never really was, I would say, religious, always spiritual, but definitely in the vein of we are our own gods, our own creators, and I don't really believe necessarily in like intelligent design type of thing. Mario says, I made my peace with Christmas, but stay away just because of the feelings that get brought up. Don't really want to entertain that energy, so agree about spiritual views, everything and nothing, right? Hey, Christine, good to see you. Glad you could make it. And so that's me in a nutshell. And I know that doesn't really answer anything, but that's just kind of how it is. Like, I'm everything and nothing at the same time. And you'll notice, like, I'm really into different magical systems. I'm into everything. Like, literally into everything. Like, there's nothing that I'm not into, really. Because I think that there's value and I think there's worth in everything. So I'm just kind of all over the place, to be honest with you. But what I've always really loved is researching and looking into the different origins of religions and spiritual practices and kind of how they evolve over time. I think that's really also pretty interesting. But, I grew up in a really spiritual, liberated household for the most part. I was never forced to go to church. I did go to church a couple times. I was kicked out, and rightly so, because I was, a real smart aleck back then. And I thought I knew everything about the world. And a lot of people think that when they're young. And a lot of the time I made adults very uncomfortable. And it wasn't until I met my husband that he made people just as uncomfortable as I made people uncomfortable. So we really found that kindred spirits with each other with there. But, I never really jived with the whole Christian religion. It never really made sense to me. My mom put me in Bible camp during the summers, but it was just really because it was like an affordable daycare solution that was down the street from her work. It was not really because she wanted me to learn anything about Bibles or scripture or anything like that. I was never like forced to participate or anything like that. And as I got older, I started expressing more interest in the occult, right? The craft had just come out in the 90s, and I was just like, finally, I think I figured something out. Like, I figured where I might belong, right? Which sent me on this whole thing at 11, 12, 13. I'm 32 now. So, set me on this whole thing of, I started figuring out who Silver Ravenwolf was, and started finding the occult section at bookstores. And even back then, there wasn't a lot of stuff. Most of it was the Satanic Bible and indigos, empaths, being an empath and things like that. And this whole idea of witchcraft and things like that, that was such a, still even then, kind of a new concept for most bookshelves. So now we really have it great, because now we have entire bookstores dedicated to occult information. So that is relevant because back then, finding anything occult based out in the real world, out in the wild, was very, very difficult to do. And somehow my mom always ended up getting me, for Christmas, we started this tradition of, she would get me like spiritual or occult things for Christmas. So the Ouija board behind me, that was a Christmas gift I got one year. Tarot cards, I got the Mythic Tarot, that was one year. I got pendulums, I've always gotten kind of divination or occultish kind of things. And I was really lucky because my mom let me kind of explore that. And she kind of was, me and her, we really developed a bond at that point when I started getting into the occult stuff, because I think in a lot of ways that she always felt rejected as well, by family and friends. And my grandmother was a very, very Christian woman. And, she even went through this thing when I was a little bit after being a teenager, where she kind of started going through this born again thing. And we didn't get along there for a minute, and she's definitely apologized to me since after that. She's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I just got swept away with that, and now we're back to that thing where every Christmas we still do this. It's 20 years later, but every Christmas we get each other tarot cards or crystals or, certain things that we kind of make our own traditions out of it. You know what I mean? Victoria says, I remember watching people as a little girl walking to a Catholic church on Christmas Eve with candles and lit lanterns, and they were dressed in their Christmas best. And I thought it was beautiful. It is beautiful. And that's a thing too. It is really, really sensorily beautiful, isn't it? And I thought it was beautiful. And I asked my mom about it, as she flat out told me, you won't make it as a Catholic. Marissa says, my mom got into visualization and mediumship, and it helped us bond also. Those shared interests really help. Yeah. And so that's kind of a thing that me and her have always had. And that's, my mom is my best friend, and you guys know that she was having some health problems. Well, maybe you don't, but if you've been here for a little while, she was having some health problems. I put up that GoFundMe thing where I was literally if you donate a certain amount, I'll give you X amount of courses and things like that. So, I ran that special last year because my mom had a near-death experience last year, and that was really part of why I really started to put a lot of my defenses and a lot of my guard down about Christmas. And I really pulled my head out of my ass when it came to, figuring out what was really, really important. If that makes sense to everybody. Has anybody gone through that, had that kind of epiphany where you're like, okay, this is really not that important anymore? And when I got married to my husband, I've been with my husband we've been together since 2006. So we've been together for quite some time, 13 years. And we're going to be married 8 years, I think, 8 or 9 years next year, something like that. But we've been friends for 20 years. And so when it came time to actually meet his family, I didn't realize this, but they are a very conservative Southern Baptist Texas family. And I mean that to the most stereotypical way that I can really say. But, we've kind of come to an understanding, I think, at this point, but it's been, a decade later. So there's something to be said for that it's not going to happen overnight. And, you're okay. It's okay to take your time with this sort of thing. But, every time that they would come to visit, I would have to pack up all my occult stuff. I would have to, make excuses like my office was undergoing construction, so they couldn't go into it, or, things like that. It finally just got to the point where my office was off limits, and they just kind of understood that. And they didn't really push the subject further, but I'm pretty sure they kind of knew it doesn't take a genius. I'm all over the internet. All you have to do is Google my name and you can kind of see what I'm doing. You know what I mean? It doesn't take anybody real smart to figure out who I am. And so I think that we just kind of let that go. But I did that in the beginning because it was more so out of respect, if that makes sense. And I felt like I felt fear, but it was honestly just because I didn't want to have a conversation, right? Like I wanted to have a good relationship with my mother-in-law, my husband's sister, his brother, their wife, his sister's husband, my nieces and nephews. I didn't want to be cut off from that because I already come from a family that they fight all the time. There's always drama. It's a lot better now that my grandmother is my ancestor because she was the instigator for a lot of that. But it's a lot better now, but it's still, I would say, not perfect. Like, for example, they couldn't even have Thanksgiving together this year, you know? I don't think that they'll be doing Christmas together this year either. Like, they just, my mom and her sister, they just, it's always something with them, you know what I mean? On top of the fact that my mom's sister, my aunt is also, kind of Christianish, and, she doesn't really jive with the whole occult thing and things like that. So it's just one of those things that I was already cut off kind of from one family. I didn't want to risk being cut off from another one, if that makes sense. So, that was a long period of time where I was very angry. And I was always feeling really, really lousy about going to his family's events. My husband's family is also very well off. They have really nice houses and they go to the mega churches and they're just really disconnected. Like, I didn't grow up with money. I didn't grow up with any of that kind of stuff, I grew up in a family that moved around every couple years because we couldn't afford to pay the house bills anymore. Things like that. So I already didn't really feel like I belonged. Then you add like the whole faith part to it, and then you definitely don't feel like you belong. And so there was a period of time where I actually refused to go to any Christmas gatherings. I refused to even decorate. I refused to even put up a tree in my own house. I was like anti Christmas for a really, really long time, several years. And I think if anybody said Merry Christmas to me, that I might like self explode, that I might implode or I might catch fire, because I was very angry. I was very angry for a long time for a lot of things. And there was a bunch of things I was angry about. I was angry about all the things I've mentioned, but I was also angry at how, judgmental they were. And, it'd be kind of like a situation where they'd be talking crap about someone who didn't go to church, all the while not knowing that I was that type of person. You know what I mean? Like, so I know that if they knew what I was really about, that they would probably gossip about me too, And I was also scared and upset about all of the atrocities you learn about that Christians had done to people. I was angry about the witch trials. I was angry about colonization, and I was angry about learning the truth behind that, about my ancestors, if not my direct ancestors, at least the ancestors in which I share DNA from. You know what I mean? And so I was just angry, and I was going through a lot of catastrophic events at that time too. Like, I was losing people were passing away, and I was having some unresolved trauma with my own father passing away, and then my mom's health started going downhill again. And it was at that time that I really had like an epiphany, right? Like, I can either be angry and resentful towards the people that I have no prayer or hope of changing, or I can find ways in which I relate to them to bring us closer, And I was also upset that I would have to be the one to do that, because that's a big responsibility for someone to have like pretty much all of the responsibility on them and none of the responsibility on the other part of being understanding or accommodating or accepting. And, I was upset because I was giving them miles and miles and miles of emotional desert. You know what I mean? And they would not even be willing to really give me a centimeter. And it was at this is that catalyst, that point in which I really found growth for myself. And maybe you will understand this, or maybe you don't understand this yet. Maybe you will understand it in the future. But I found myself in a position where the pain or the burden of being isolated from my community, from my family, and it was like the pain of meeting them 99.9% of the way and them barely meeting me any of the way. And I felt like it was at this time where the burden of not being involved with them, or the burden of carrying around anger or resentment or negative feelings like embarrassment and things like that was more painful than just trying on my part to just show up and be a good person and hope that they see that I'm trying and hope that they will just, eventually either come around, or if they won't come around, that they will just, accept that I'm there, and maybe it won't be such a negative experience for both of us. You know what I mean? Because by not showing up, I was actually creating more drama than by showing up. You know what I mean? And like, it's a weird predicament to be in, and I don't think that there's any right or wrong answer for everybody, but we kind of have to figure out what is worth it to us. Like, is it worth it to maybe try to think about things in a different way, maybe try to adjust our mindset, or to rewrite our narrative about those experiences for the sake of being with your family and being together with the people that, you love, are supposed to be there for you and things like that. So for me, I had that available. And I know that I'm privileged, and I understand that I had that available, meaning that like I wasn't like, they didn't automatically just cast me out. I was kind of assuming that without really having that conversation with them. And that's more of the distinction that I want to give you today. If you take anything away from this, is that it was more about the potential drama or the potential misunderstanding and miscommunications that would happen, that I didn't show up and that I was fearful, versus having those actual conversations. And I realized, as I've had conversations with my mother-in-law now, that we actually are a lot alike. We think about the world in a very, very similar terms, but we just have a different lens that we kind of look through it. And I've found a lot of healing for me there. And if you have the opportunity, I hope that I can encourage you to pursue that for yourself. But if you're not ready for that, that's okay too. And there's really no shame in that. Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Adon Jesus. Good to see you. And so, like I said, this really didn't happen overnight for me. Last year, if you remember, what was it? It was the Summer of Magic. We did the gods and goddesses, right? And so I did a talk on Odin, and that was one of my workshops that I gave. And I encourage you after today to go watch that workshop as well, because this is sort of like a continuation of that. And last year I took a 23andMe DNA test. And one of the things that I felt was really, really valuable for me was to, as someone who doesn't belong to a tradition, who doesn't really have a tradition, who doesn't really have a family tradition, who is very much not Christian, will never ever be Christian, I found that the first place for me to start was really in my roots. And so I took the DNA test, and I learned that I'm mostly Scandinavian. And Scandinavians are people that are from like Norway and Finland and places like that. So around where the Norse people are. And also I learned that I'm also Germanic, which is French, Belgium, Germany, those sort of places, Rhineland, that sort of thing. And so I also have a little bit of Spanish and Portuguese and Native American and Ashkenazi Jewish as well. So I'm a bunch of different things. And so, like I said, in the Summer of Magic, I've been kind of doing this tour of spiritual beliefs based off where all my DNA comes from, where all my people come from, right? And I figured I would start with what I'm mostly, and then I would kind of move down the list and kind of explore other different things and things like that. So one of the things I was really looking forward to doing for this 12 Days of Christmas was exploring the traditional and modern symbolism of Yule, which happens to be a Scandinavian winter solstice holiday, and how that relates to contemporary Christian symbols and icons, right? Thanks, Marissa. Marissa says, I loved your Odin talk. Thank you so much. I learned so much when I did that. It was a really a great opportunity for me to learn. And I did that talk about Odin, and I've just decided that the first place for me to start as someone who feels that they don't really belong anywhere is to start with my own indigenous traditions and beliefs that my ancestors are from. And so I want to continue that today with this presentation, and I want to kind of explore with you, talk about, my roots and maybe some of the roots that we all kind of share. And like I said, that disclaimer I said at the very beginning, if you're just joining us now and you missed it, this is not the end all be all of pagan symbols in Christmas. This is only really going to come from the lens of the Scandinavian people and the Germanic people. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started in this. So tell me in the comments below, what are some major Christmas icons or symbols that you personally are familiar with? So for example, you could be thinking about like the Christmas tree, or you could be thinking about the Yule log, or Santa in his sleigh, in his reindeer. So when you think of Christmas, what are some of the symbols that you yourself think of and that come to mind? Let me know in the comments below. So let's talk about what Yule is. So Yule is a 12-day long pagan, basically festival. It's a Germanic or Scandinavian winter holiday, and it's celebrated around the winter solstice, starting around December 21st to 23rd. It just depends on which day that the solstice actually falls on. And it's the 12 days after that, basically. So Yule is basically a 12-day long pagan celebration, kind of like the 12 days of Christmas. That's kind of where it came from. And what it is it's celebrating the wild hunt, Odin and the wild hunt, and we're going to talk about that. But that is a motif that's really associated with ancestral veneration. It's also associated with shamanic practices, shamanic journeying, as well as the rebirth of the sun goddess that actually predates the Christian Christmas. So really interesting. I think the first thing that really intrigued me the most when I really started looking into Yule and the origins of Yule was the fact that, Christians celebrate the birth of the sun, right? And we see that motif carried through many, many, many different types of traditions. But in the Yule, in the Scandinavian Yule particularly, it's the birth of a sun goddess. And that was really interesting to me because most of, we have the Greeks and things like that kind of associate Persephone waking up, Persephone and Demeter, right? So Persephone waking up from her slumber where she's down in hell, down in Hades, down in the underworld. We don't see that kind of rebirth of the feminine until spring. So it was really interesting that not only, is there, the birth of the sun, the rebirth of the sun and the days getting longer, right? But also that there is the birth of a goddess. And I thought that off the bat was really, really interesting because we don't typically celebrate or associate Christmas with feminine energies. I think now we do more because we have this whole icon of Christmas, what's her name? Mrs. Claus, right? So she's kind of worked herself in there now as the supporting role. But in Yule specifically, it's a sun goddess celebration. So what do you guys think about that? Santa, candy canes. Yes, candy canes in the shape of a shepherd's hook. We'll talk about that. Some symbols I think of in love is snowy weather, twinkle lights, glitter, angels. Yeah. Christmas, Marissa says, I don't know if it's pagan, but I love the chimes that revolve around the candles. The bells and things like that. That's also really interesting. Marissa says, interesting about the birth of the sun. I've read about the Tuatha. Are you talking about the Tuatha Dé Danann? The sun, our Lord, in their prayers. Or who are the Nahua? Who are they? I can't tell if that's Facebook trying to correct something or if it's meant to be that way. You never know sometimes. Angela says, ladies rock. Yeah. And so that was really interesting for me as a woman in this world who, most of the holidays do not revolve around women. So that was really interesting for me. Now, we also have Odin, which is the original Santa. Odin is the original Santa Claus. The Aztecs. Okay. Gotcha. That's right. I think you and I actually had a discussion about that one time. I'm actually remembering something like that. So Odin, as a continuation from the previous talk I did, now if you're watching this as replay, you can pause this, go watch that other talk and come back to this if you want. In the PDF, I give you a link to actually watch that video as well. So it's kind of up to you how you want to do it. But after Odin had slain his great-great-grandfather, the giants, right, the giant Ymir, Odin then created the first man and woman, Ask and Embla. And he built a safe haven and earth for them that he called Midgard. And we talked about this motif as in the Garden of Eden. We talked about this motif as the Adam and Eve. There was a story even older than that, and that's the Ask and Embla, or possibly even going on like around in the same time, where that all kind of happened, and the Fertile Crescent and things like that. And then our ancestors kind of moved up, and the stories kind of changed. But we can't really deny that the Ask and Embla, the Adam and Eve, built a safe haven for humans called Midgard, or the Garden of Eden, right? So we kind of see that motif kind of following through. And when this was done, Odin basically became a hermit, right? He began traveling the 9 worlds of the tree Yggdrasil, and he was said to be like a shapeshifter. He would dress up as an old man or a beggar and be begging for coins. And it was the kind of the idea that you give your coins to the less fortunate, because you don't know if it's Odin, right? And he might play a nasty trick on you if you don't give him some charity. He would also come across as the virile young warrior, hunter type of motif. And he basically would walk around mankind, and on his 2 shoulders would be the 2 ravens, Hugin and Mugen, and Thought and Form, right? And they would fly around the entire world, gather all the gossip and all the knowings about what was going on in the world, and report back to Odin and tell Odin of his many secrets. And we see this coming through, Odin being the original Santa Claus for many different reasons. We're going to kind of explore a couple different of those, because we're not necessarily just talking about one specific people. We have to realize that the Scandinavian people are kind of like different tribes of people. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Celtic origins as well. And that kind of all intermingles and kind of mixes together. So every year during the winter solstice, an event would take place called the Wild Hunt, or the Great Hunt. And it would be Odin, and he would be, following him would be elves, right? So the elves were very, very important to the Nordic lore. But elves, as we see them during Christmas, as these little tinkers that build toys and things like that and are cheery, that's not really the idea of who the elves were for the Scandinavian people and the people who celebrated Yule. Elves were more like what we would consider the Celtic Fae. They were mischievous, spiteful spirits that would steal children or cause mischief and mayhem. And there was really little discernment between elves as being spirits, forest spirits, or fairies, or even dwarves, and we have brownies and things like that. They're all different like categories of elves and fae. But when I talk about elves, what I really mean is fae and vice versa. It's kind of a similar vein. They are like the forest creatures and the wild spirits of the forest, and the animals and things like that. So Odin ruled over those people, and so he would have his elves behind him, right, trailing, and you would see Odin on his horse. Now, there's something really significant about Odin's horse, and that is that it's an 8-legged horse. It's an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. And so this is kind of where we get the first inclination of Santa in his sleigh with elves, with reindeer. So we have an 8-legged horse that kind of later turned into 8 reindeer. We have, I think, 9 reindeer with Rudolph, which is a later adaptation of that, was not in the original, mythos or lore of Santa Claus. And then we also have the activities of the Wild Hunt was really interesting, because it's nothing like we have now. The winter solstice, or Yule, and Odin visiting with his elves, and not only it would be his elves, but it would also be the dead, the damned, the people that didn't get into Valhalla, right? So Odin was really an underdog for everybody. Whether you were a criminal or a con artist or a saint, Odin loved you no matter what, right? So you have all of this variety makeup of people, of ancestors and the dead and things like that. And it was sort of like a frenzy experience where there would be the great hunt, the wild hunt, and you would not see it, but you would hear it, and it would be heard by the barkings of wild dogs, okay? So you never really saw the wild hunt going on. But the Norse people, what they did is you think about where they lived, right? They lived in this very snowy area where there's not a lot of sun. There's not a long spring, summer, and fall. There's really probably no fall, which is why most likely the Scandinavian people really didn't have a sense of like Halloween, because I was looking into that. That's really more of the Celtic people. It's not the Nordic people that had Halloween. So they didn't really have Halloween. But what they did have was Yule, which was originally, interestingly enough, a combination of what we would consider today Halloween and Christmas, but wrapped up into one thing. So it was actually dark and light. There was a duality to it that was kind of understood. And with the Great Hunt, it was a guess. It was a guess who was going to get blessed, whose land was going to get blessed, and whose land was going to get cursed, right? Depending on how good and bad the people were that year. And there was many reasons, like I said, why the Great Hunt was never seen but heard. And it's because it was thought that if you were to look upon the dead, the elves, the fae, that you would then become a target. They would kidnap you, right? And they would make you one of them, or they would do whatever with you, right? So it was one of those things where the Norse people had long houses, and each family had a long house. And you would live with your aunts and uncles and cousins and things like that, and you would all live in this rectangular kind of house, right? And that would be your family house. And around that time, it was just snowed in. People would be snowed in, right? And so around that time, we have the summer, we have the, what is it called? Winter's Night. We also have that kind of celebration there where it's more of a community kind of fest where people are getting in touch with their community, their local community. Well, winter solstice was more of an isolated holiday. You would spend that with your immediate family and not necessarily with the people in your community, because everybody would be tucked away. Women would be drying and salting the meat, the reindeer meat. You would be growing vegetables like cabbages and kales and things like that, whatever is indigenous as a winter crop in your location. And so you really wouldn't be going outside. You really wouldn't be celebrating with people in the whole community. It was more something that was intimate, right? And more something that was about celebrating with your immediate family. Was it bad to see the wild hunt? Yes, it was bad. It was, you better get inside if you saw the wild hunt. That was kind of how it was. Or if you heard any weird sounds in the forest, you'd probably want to get inside really quickly, because you don't know if you're going to be kidnapped or elf food or what, or join the dead as they go across the sky, right, in their Great Hunt or Wild Hunt. Now, another reason why we also have the Wild Hunt would not be witnessed in the winter, like I said, in Northern European countries, because the winter can be really harsh, and it was really one of the second to last communal feast holidays that involved sacrifices, and they would do sacrifices to the fae. We see that around October, like that. I think that's the one that's called Winter's Night, where it's not Halloween, but it's something along that lines. It's a different kind of version of Halloween. It's held a little bit earlier, I believe, than the 31st. And during the Wild Hunt, he would ride Sleipnir. He would, which turned into the 8 reindeer of Santa, and we didn't know. So you have to think about the time. You have to think about that. We didn't know if it would be safe to be outside or not. Okay. So that's one part of it. Hey, Leonie, good to see you. The next part of it that I want to talk about is another interesting aspect to Santa and the sleigh icons, because the Nordic people were an animistic tradition, which means that they believed that basically everything has a soul. Animals have a soul, plants have a soul, everything and anything basically has a soul, and that can be interacted with. Or if not soul is the right word, that's more of a spirit within all things, right? And many of the Germanic people were deer and specifically reindeer herders. Partly this is partly where we get the whole candy cane thing, where in the shape of the shepherd's hook, that was also part of the Christian mythos with Jesus being a shepherd and things like that. But the icon of the hook is the shepherd's hook is actually much older than that, or is more versatile than just that. The reindeer were a really, really integral part of the way of life for the Germanic peoples and the Celtic, not the Celtic, but the Germanic peoples. Because the reindeer provided the meat and the clothes and the tools and a lot more. So they were kind of like the buffalo to the Native Americans. You know, they were very, very important. They were regarded as holy and sacred. And many Germanic peoples were like reindeer shepherds, where each family would have their own herd and things like that. They would tend to their own herd of reindeer. Well, there is a type of fungus. Here's where it gets really fun. There's a type of fungus called Coprophyllum, I think it's called. But it's a type of fungi that grows from the droppings of animals, and specifically the droppings of reindeer. Now, this mushroom that grows, we see this all the time during Christmas. And it's that little red mushroom with the white fluffy spots on it. It's all over. Like, if you really look, if you've not noticed that before, pay attention, because you will start to notice. This is where we see, you know, it's usually around like the elves and the gnomes and things like that. That sort of like decor, like elf on a shelf decor and stuff like that. That's usually where we see those red mushrooms with the fluffy white dots on it. But this fungus was used in a ceremony with young warriors to help them enter a trance-like state, a state of ecstasy, a hallucinogenic state, to join Odin on the wild hunt through shamanic journeying. So you would have these young warriors that maybe had not been to battle yet. And it was almost kind of like, the best way I can describe it maybe is like, it would almost be like playing a video game, or their version of a video game, or their version of like, you know, going to the war or being on a great hunt in virtual reality, sort of, right? That's kind of a modern way to kind of look at it. But they would have their young warriors take that, and then they would, you know, journey shamanically through the use of plant medicines to join the wild hunt. And you have this idea of the shaman, the shaman of the group, or the healer of the group, of the house or of the community, kind of dressing up and supplying people with these fungus. And that kind of becomes, if you look at some of the older ways that Santa Claus is stylized, you will notice that he's stylized with a red cloak and little white poof balls. We also have the red hat with the little white poof ball, right? And we have the white fuzzy stuff around his jacket and his pants and things like that. So that's kind of where that symbolism kind of comes from, which was really, really interesting. And it was considered very, very dangerous to do this because it was thought that journeyers could often suffer like magical wounds during the wild hunt that would cross over to the physical reality. They could go mad. They could experience some sort of like catatonic state. You know, they could go into a wild frenzy. And so it was considered to be, you know, quite dangerous to do this, but it was also considered to be sort of like a rite of passage for young warriors to do. So that was really interesting. It's also suggested that sometimes cheeky people would add the fungus to the mead or any type of traditional alcoholic drink. For the Norse people drank it. Usually for the Norse people, it was like mead, some type of honey and water, fermented concoction. I believe for the Celtic people, quote me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe it was honey wine that the Celtics were really into, and the honey that the Fae really, really enjoyed. And so towards the end of the night, you know, they might spike the mead, and those who partook would be carried off, you know, seemingly flying into the sky on these, being influenced by these hallucinogenic substances, you know. So also on top of that, we had the reindeer themselves who were known to eat the mushrooms, and they would have some bizarre behavior, right? They would be like dancing around, or they would be running around, or, you know, just acting bizarrely, right? Really bizarre behavior for the herd. All right. So that's kind of like where Christmas, Santa Claus kind of came from. Some different ways that may have kind of come about, some ways that we kind of see those themes sort of repeating. And then we also have where we have Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas is a little bit of a different motif, but still inspired by that sort of original motif too. Saint Nicholas came about, I think it was like the 300s, like 300 something AD after death, or Common Era CE. So we know, so we look at the timeline of Christianity. And so we know that it was about, I think, what was it, like 50 or maybe 100 years after Jesus' death, where we really see the cult of Christianity really coming into play, right? We really see it starting to gain traction. We really start seeing it become popular. There was a man named Nicholas who was a missionary. He was a missionary for the Christian people. And what he would do is he would go around, and he was said to be someone who lived a life of poverty, right? He was said to be someone who basically worked and gave all his earnings to charity. And we would see Saint Nicholas come about and more taking more of the precedence over like Santa Claus, and really the evolution of the pagan Odin Santa to, the Christian Santa, is we see this emergence of the figure of Saint Nicholas, and we also see still again that duality of the Norse people, of the wild hunt of Odin, it not necessarily being a good thing entirely, something that was like more of a combination of Halloween and Christmas today, of what we know of it. We also see the birth in that time period, around that time period, of the idea of Krampus. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Krampus because Susie Zern is going to be talking about, she's going to dedicate a whole workshop to Krampus and his origin and things like that. So I'm going to kind of skip over a little bit of that, but I did kind of want to talk about how it relates to Norse mythology. Victoria says, young men spiking punch, some things never change. Right. So the duality of Odin delivering gifts or curses can also be seen as time goes on and the myth evolves. We see the emergence of the figure of Krampus, the horned demigod who kidnaps and punishes children who misbehave during the year, and the holy Saint Nicholas figure who bestows blessings and gifts. Interesting, right? So I'll let Susie pick up there where I left off because she's going to have a whole hour to talk about this. All right, so let's talk about the hanging of stockings. Now, the idea was that you could bribe the fae, right? So if you didn't want to be kidnapped by the fae, or you didn't want to be the victim of any of, or the elves, or the victim of any of their shenanigans, you could bribe them. And small children would do this by, today we see the hanging of stockings on the fireplace, and we see stocking stuffers and things like that, right, as gifts. Now, we kind of have this idea of we can bribe Santa Claus, right? Or maybe not bribe, but like gift Santa Claus some things, and we typically do that thinking about milk and cookies, right? So that's something most of us have grown up with, whether you're religious or not, the idea that you leave out milk and cookies for Santa Claus. Now, Odin and Sleipnir could also be bribed. So children would leave their boots outside of the long houses, the long cabins, and they would stuff hay into the boots. And this hay would basically feed Odin's horse. Now, I remember in elementary school, we did a thing where we built a boot and we put hay in it, but it was for Santa's reindeer. It's literally the exact same thing. And this is the idea of where hanging the stockings came from, and the idea of stocking stuffers as gifts, because the idea would be Sleipnir would eat the hay, and then Odin would leave a little trinket, a little gift inside the boot. And the kids, and for most cases, that's all the kids had to look forward to. There was no Christmas presents under the tree, right? In most cases, children would get one gift, and it was only because they would leave a boot out with hay in it to feed Sleipnir on his travels, right? During the wild great hunt. So, interesting stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the Yule log. So most of us know what a Yule log is. Yule log really wasn't that important to me growing up. None of my family really, I grew up in Arizona, number one. So we didn't have fireplaces. We didn't have chimneys. We didn't have things like that. So my culture didn't really lend itself to that. However, a lot of cultures do, especially ones that get really, cold during the winter, or you are in a place that has a fireplace, or that's kind of a normal type of thing. Marissa says, wow, that's really cool about the hay that it survived, right? I thought that was really cool too. So during Yule, there were two very important aspects to trees. We have the Yule log and we have the Christmas tree. So the first aspect of it would be to bringing trees into the longhouse was a sign of protection. We did that for protection, right? Because if you think about it, evergreen trees were the type of tree that no matter what it looks like outside, all the other trees are dead and dying and all the leaves are on the floor, but miraculously, the evergreen trees, they stay green and they stay alive. And so it was thought that the forest spirits would inhabit the evergreen trees. And it was this idea that, because with the Norse people, they definitely had a relationship with the spirits of the land through sacrifices and their blots or their feasts and things like that. And they would always be trying to make allies with the spirits of the land so that they would have good harvests. And so weather would be kind to them and things like that. So this idea that the protective spirits lived in the evergreen trees is why we take the evergreen tree into the longhouse, to be actually like a pillar of protection for the family. We are inviting the forest spirits in to our house to keep them warm, to keep them entertained. And we see this, through the ornaments and things like that. I'll get to that. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. But firstly, we did this through the Yule log. So the Yule log was very an important way to harvest it. You can only harvest a Yule log from a dead tree. So a dead tree, practically speaking, would be wood that is dead and easy to burn. Because if you try, I don't know if you've ever tried to burn like alive trees, like trees are not dried out and things like that. It's really near impossible to keep them lit. They just kind of burn out because there's too much water and liquid within them, right? So the Yule log was typically a tree that was dead, that was cultivated and chopped down into a giant Yule log. And then this Yule log would be decorated with like mistletoe and holly. And they would also inscribe with knives and sharp objects like protective runes into their Yule log. And kind of like the Jewish menorah in a way. It's kind of like a similar kind of story-ish kind of, where the Yule log was meant to be burnt for 12 nights, right? And it was considered bad luck if the Yule log burnt out before those 12 days, or if there was nothing left of the Yule log before those 12 days. And what that did is it served a couple purposes. It was like an offering. It was burned as a magical offering, inscribed with magical symbols and sigils and things like that. Also, it was to keep people warm. And because it was very, very cold, right? And January and February are typically when winter really, really starts. So it was intended to keep people warm. But they would decorate it with like berries and things like that. And we see, if you look around, you will see in stores Yule logs that you can actually buy now that you can put into your fireplace, that they come prepackaged. Or if you're like me, you have electric fireplaces and you can get special Yule type like electric fake wooden things to put in your fireplace for Yule. And so there's that as well. There's also some really interesting cool Yule log decorations where it's carved out of, and I really want to get one of these, but it's carved out of wood, and there's little candle holders, and there's 12 candle holders, sort of like a menorah, where each for the 12 days of Yule, you can light a candle, and that's kind of like, the 12 days of Christmas and the Yule log making it through the 12 days of Christmas. We also see the Yule log now fashioned more into desserts, which is really, really interesting to see that the Yule log has kind of transformed into desserts and sweets and stuff like that. So if you've ever had those dark chocolate rolls, I don't know if you guys have had these, but they usually come, they might not even be called a Yule log, but you'll usually see them at Christmas parties. They're like about this big, and they're like chocolate cake kind of, and they're rolled with like chocolate and like white icing and stuff like that. And sometimes they'll even put like cranberries and berries and stuff like that in there. That's kind of where that came from. Now, the other part of that, the other aspect to trees being very, very important to Yule is that we would have the Christmas tree as it's known today. Again, like I said before earlier, the Norse people would choose an evergreen tree because of its ability to stay vibrant, and it was considered to be the host of where the protective forest spirits would dwell. And so they would bring those Christmas trees inside. And it was thought that the evergreen trees were like really sacred, and they housed feminine earth spirits, and they were kind of indistinguishable from elves and things like that. But the main idea here is that they were like benevolent, they were protective. And it was thought by bringing in the evergreen tree inside the house, you would have protection from malicious forces, and that would be extended to your family, and that would be to appease. And so, because you're taking the tree out of the forest, you're literally cutting. I know some of you are like, but if you're cutting down the tree, isn't that like sacrilege? Well, that's where ornaments kind of come from, to appease the spirit that is contained within the evergreen tree. The Norse people, the Germanic peoples, would decorate their trees with ornaments as berries, wooden slabs that were carved with runes and other magical symbols and protective emblems and things like that. They would also put wax, candle wax on there as well, like old style dipping candles, beeswax and things like that. You might also see any type of fruit that you could put on your tree as well. You would see like ornaments made out of dried fruit and things like that. So the people really didn't do anything like fancy made out of plastic like we did today. They didn't really have lights per se, but they did have candles that kind of morphed into Christmas tree lights. And they also had protective symbols and things like that adorned onto the tree, which kind of became the ornaments. Really interesting, right? Oh, really? Angela says, I've never heard of the Yule log till my son went to a French restaurant. Really interesting. Oh, thanks, Leonie. She says she's loving this knowledge. Pamela says, I always question why we are cutting down a tree to bring inside. Leonie says, we eat Yule logs at Christmas in the UK. Yeah. I think it's definitely more prominent in like the eastern part of the United States where it makes more sense to do that. And then UK, as Leonie says, so that's really cool. Now, on a practical note, let's think about this more practically, right? Evergreen trees are known for their fragrant smell. Now imagine being in a longhouse with 30 to 50 of your family members for several months. No bathing. Very rare opportunities to go outside to use the restroom. Think about that. So, one of the main reasons why, the non-spiritual reasons why we used to bring in the trees is for health reasons, to have like a better fragrance in the house and to kind of cover up body odor and things like that. So, interesting fact. All right. So what about Christmas dinner? Now, what do you guys usually eat at Christmas dinner? I know Mel says there's a ton of Yule decor on Etsy you can buy, which is cool. I was looking at some of that stuff. Marissa says, I think pine smells are an antidepressant. Yeah, absolutely. Especially, a wild people like the Scandinavian people, and then having to be cooped up in a house. Yeah, for sure. So what do we usually eat at Christmas dinner? Ham, right? You can basically always look forward to having ham for Christmas dinner. At least it was like that in my family. Yeah, Christmas dinner, we have ham. Well, why ham? So it kind of goes back to another story, another mythos story. Pigs were actually, for the Germanic people, pigs were basically like cows to American people. They didn't really have a lot of cows because if you think about it, pigs took up less space. They were easier to farm. They were indigenous to that kind of area. You have boars and things like that, natural wild pigs. But it was not... in the Western world, actually, goat and pig were not really eaten that often. But goat and pig were basically the staple of the Germanic people. They typically ate goat around the beginning of the year, and they eat ham at the end of the year. That's kind of how they flip-flop it. Kind of like how we do turkey for Thanksgiving and then ham for Christmas. They do goat in the beginning of the year and then ham at the end of the year. So... pig and goat are actually indigenous to them, but it's not eaten as frequently as in a lot of other places. Like, for example, there's a lot of cultures that do not eat pig. A lot of them. Also, cows were also seen as rich people food, right? They are expensive. They're expensive to tend. They take up a lot of space. And then you go more towards like the Norway kind of area, and then they have reindeer. So they didn't really have cows, but a lot of people had pigs. So you would find a lot of people eating pig. And the reason why ham really takes the shining spot is because of the god Freyr, or Frey, depending on which mythos you're looking at. So there is, like in the Celtic mythos, and most of the pagan mythos, there's this like triple aspect to it, right? You have the maiden mother crone, and then you have the triple aspect for you have the wild hunter. Um, I can't remember what's the triple aspect for the masculine? I can't remember. Someone help me out, remind me. But Frey was seen as the young, virile, fertile aspect of masculine divinity. And so we have this myth of Frey being accompanied by a boar. He had a pet boar, and he rode this pet boar into battles and on his travels, and during his wild hunts, he was associated with the boar. The boars and pigs were really prized in Nordic cultures as the winning meat and as the sacred animal to Frey. So they were often sacrificed to Frey to ensure a bountiful hunt in the coming months. So the tradition is this. Basically, you would have the pig, that would be the boar, that would be sacrificed at Christmas. Now, there was a special ceremony that would be taken place, and all of the young warriors would lay their hand on the pig, and they would make their vows. And it was seen as that they were making their vows to Frey himself, right? And much kind of like we set affirmations for the new year in the Gregoric calendar-based societies, like we do. We set our intentions for the year. And so all the warriors would lay their hands on the boar. They would make their vows for the coming year, make their sacred promises, or set their goals or intentions, things like that. And then the boar would be sacrificed, and they would immediately cook it and they would eat it. And that boar would feed a whole family, for several weeks at that point. Yeah, right? Freyr? Yes, associated with boars. Uh-huh. Pamela says, wasn't mine too, ham and turkey, but the younger two kids don't want it. So it might be lasagna, pizza, or Chinese this year. I know that. Neody says, we have turkey, fish, beef, lamb, and ham in the UK and the West Indies. Yeah. Marissa says, wow, and people held them to those vows. I have heard. Right. And, kind of like this thought that if something bad happened, it might be because, Johnny didn't uphold his vow that he gave to Freyr, that sort of thing. So let's talk also about mistletoe and holly. So the tradition of hanging mistletoe and holly comes from two different practices that kind of morphed over time. So there's the first story of Balder, Balder is kind of like the Jesus kind of figure. He's like the most beautiful of all of the gods. He's the most pious. You could always count on Balder to do you a favor. He's the guy you can always count on. He had a really young, innocent, kind of naive kind of spirit about him. But he was the most beautiful, and he's the son of Odin and Frigg. Okay. So, brother to Thor and, all of the other lineage of gods and goddesses under that mythos. But the thing is, however, Balder was plagued his whole entire life with visions of his death. He had the gift of prophecy, and he would see his death, and it troubled him so much that his mother, Frigg, went to all of the living beings that came or grew from beings or things that came or grew from the earth, and made them sign a pact with her that they would not come to harm her son. They would never harm him. Well, most of us know Loki. Loki is sort of the orphaned giantling that Odin finds when he is at war with the giants, and he kind of finds this orphan giantling, and he brings him back to Asgard to raise him, and not necessarily adopts him. We see in the movie that he's kind of like his adopted son. He's kind of like that, but it was never really clear that, he was actually adopted. He was just kind of like this giantling that they found and brought back and just kind of raised him, right? And Loki loved creating mischief. He loved, tricking people. He was the trickster aspect of, I think in a lot of ways it probably came from Odin's, because we see this morph. We see this evolution of Odin as being the all-father, the protector. And then we see kind of like it kind of evolves into Loki kind of taking on some of these aspects of the trickster archetype that Odin was originally associated with. And that's just how it kind of evolves over time. But Loki was really jealous. He was really jealous of how beautiful Balder was. He was really jealous of how liked he was, and he wanted to teach him a lesson. And Loki was smart and very cunning, and soon realized that Frigg had not made a pact with the mistletoe. Now, if you know anything about the mistletoe and the holly plant, the mistletoe is a parasitic plant. So it's actually, when we see those green leaves, those green shiny leaves with the red berries, that's actually holly. That's a holly bush. We call it mistletoe, but it's not actually mistletoe. Mistletoe is different in that its berries is actually kind of like a yellowish, kind of translucent, kind of pale yellow color. And it's a parasitic plant. And what it would do is it would grow around trees, and it would survive off of trees, right? It didn't actually grow from the ground. It grew from being a parasite on different other types of plants. And so Loki realized this, that Frigg had not made a pact with the mistletoe. And Loki fashioned a long spear made out of mistletoe and convinced one of the brothers, Hod, to practice striking with the spear. He's like, Hod, you need to start practicing. You're blind, but what if you have to go to fight or something like that, right? Convinces him by any means necessary. Well, Hod is over there, striking with his spear, practicing, and Balder comes walking by and basically gets stabbed by the mistletoe and dies. And he eventually is resurrected in later mythology. But it's basically said that the tears of Frigg crying over Balder's death became the white berries on the mistletoe plant. And that's kind of where we see the origin story of the mistletoe. And it was said during war, if warriors happened upon mistletoe, like if they were out in the field and they were warring, if they found mistletoe in the wild, it was customary to lay down their weapons and to cease fighting, right? That's part of the aspect of where it became, that game we play where we kiss under the mistletoe. Now, as wars became further and further removed from society as a normal thing, mistletoe then became fashioned into a game that people would play. And it would be played by quarreling parties. So if you were fighting with someone, you would have to play the mistletoe game, where you would have to stand under the hanging mistletoe and make up, right? Now, there was another game that was created out of the mistletoe and holly, and that is they would fashion. This is more of like the Celtic version of it, which came a little bit later, I think, where you would have two hoops made out of wood, likely branches, some type of wood at that point in time, and they would be woven together by the mistletoe, by the vines of the mistletoe, and it would become a game where for each you would have the mistletoe wrapped around the rings of the hoops, right? And for every time a couple would come and kiss, they would remove one berry. And after all the berries were removed, then the game was over. But then it also kind of later than that, it kind of transformed into what we now consider to be kissing booths, where maidens who worked in bars and things like that, taverns during the holidays, serving up meat and stuff like that, they would have these mistletoe games out where you would line up under the mistletoe and you would have to pay the maid a certain amount of money to give her a kiss. And then after all the berries were picked, then the game was over. So that was a really interesting for me to kind of find out, because I really didn't know it was that involved, right? I didn't know there was that much lore behind mistletoe. And then this is also kind of like where we get more into the Celtic side, where the Scottish ballad Auld Lang Syne kind of comes from. It was kind of inspired by that, not completely, not indefinitely inspired by that, but a lot of it was. And that song is basically, let bygones be bygones, let past quarrels kind of be forgotten, and remembering people that have passed, remembering people that can't be there during the holidays and things like that. And it was, it's a song that kind of talks about putting everything else aside, putting everything that's not important aside, and turning our attention to the present moment with family and with friends. Now, we also have the wreath. Let me see how many things we have left here. Okay, we only have 2 things left to talk about here. We have the wreath. So much like the wreaths of today in the Christian tradition, the Norse made round wreaths from holly leaves, kind of like a hybrid of the mistletoe and also the bringing the trees in. It was kind of like a hybrid situation like that, where the wreaths were also made out of evergreen leaves, and it was like put out on the front door as a method of protection to protect the cabin. So not only do we have the Christmas tree protecting the inside, but we also have the green wreath protecting the outside. Also, to appease the nature spirits and the birds and the wildlife, they would take like sinew, and they would like take it and they would roll it in like sugar or honey or something like that. And they would like drip it in there, and then they would roll it in like nuts and seeds and berries and things like that. And they would loop it around the wreath on the outside, and that would help feed the animals outside during the winter months when it was really, really cold and there was not a lot of vegetation out there. So really interesting, right? All right, last thing we're going to talk about today, and then I'll let you guys go. So Christmas caroling. Similar to the Celtic Samhain, the winter solstice is also a time, like we talked about. We're kind of going to go round loop here, go back to the very beginning, where, the winter solstice, Yule, was kind of a combination of Christmas and Halloween. And so it was also thought that, like Samhain, the veil would be very, very thin. In fact, the veil would be thin from October all the way to probably about February. So it's a very, very long period of time. And as mentioned earlier, with Odin leading the wild hunt, with his band of elves and fae and ancestors, this kind of followed through to Christmas caroling. So what kids would do is they would go around and they would put on masks so that the elves and the fae could not recognize them and the dead could not recognize them, or to blend in, kind of like the Celtic Samhain. They would blend in with the fae and not be seen as children, but be seen as fae or elves or deceased. They would put on masks and, they would adorn them to make them look kind of frightening and things like that. And they would go door to door and they would sing carols to the people, which were like songs of enchantment for protection. And in return, the patriarch or the matriarch of the house would give them cakes and sweets that were blessed by Suna, or the sun goddess. And they would be little cakes in a round shape with a little wheel on them. And that would be representative of the sun goddess, right? So, how many of you learned a lot today? It's been an hour and a half. I'm sorry to keep you so long, but really it's fascinating. And I just thank you so much for joining me for this workshop and hanging out with me and learning something new. And I would love it if you would be interested in downloading this PDF. I actually have a PDF for you. So I'm going to give that to you now. You can download the PDF, and it has some more information in it that I didn't even get to. And it talks things a little bit more depth that you can kind of read about it. And here it is. Thanks, Marla. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Yeah. So I just really quickly wanted to talk to you guys really quickly about this. If you like the Summer of Magic, if you like the 12 Days of Christmas, if you've been watching us for a couple years and you're like, I really want to learn how to do that. I get messages all the time. How can I do your collabs with you? If you want to participate in collabs like this, right now, as it stands right now, you need to be in the Market Yourself as a Tarot Life Coach program. In that program, I will teach you how to do this. And it's part of our graduation ceremony every 6 months that I let all of the students in that course do this collaboration with me. I'll teach you how to put together your talk. I'll teach you how to do the live streaming. I'll teach you how to pitch and everything else. So if you are interested in that, let me know, because if you see yourself as someone who is really interested in teaching or sharing your wisdom with other people, if you're looking at me and thinking, gosh, I really want to get online and I really want to go on live stream and I really want to talk to people about spirituality, or I want to talk to them about the things that are interesting or the things that I'm really passionate about, get in touch with me, because I think that you would probably be a good candidate to do this collaboration with us and a good candidate to be in one of my programs. All right. You are so welcome, you guys. Thanks for joining me. Tomorrow, Mario will be doing a talk about tea and using the Ghosts of Christmas Past, and it's just going to be such a great workshop. I really look forward to tomorrow. All right. I will see you guys a couple Fridays from now, where we're going to talk about the intuitive art of storytelling. Bye.